Good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of RISC OS Open Limited. I'm going to talk to you a bit about what they've been up to in the last 12 months and some of the things on their ever-growing list of things to do in the future. So there'll be a little opportunity at the end for any questions as well. Like I said there. So since the last Wakefield Show back in April last year, just after that, rules updated and released the NutPy. So this has much the same set of applications on it to enhance your Raspberry Pi as the previous NutPy, but we had to go around all of the developers and get them to do some updates for the Mark II Raspberry Pi, which really those deeply interested in technical mumbo jumbo is because the original Raspberry Pi was an ARM architecture 6, which is quite compatible with the Ionics processor-wise, whereas the Mark II Raspberry Pi is an ARM v7, so quite a few of the titles needed to be recompiled to make it work with that, including the rule DDE, which was similarly tied to the Mark I original Raspberry Pi. So yes, there was a bit of lag. So although the Mark II Pi came out for the Southwest show last year, it actually took 4 more months before that was available. But the more positive spin on that, other than the slight delay, is that now there's been over £20,000 has been fed back to the authors that have contributed to the NutPy. Really is a thank you, but by contributing to the NutPy and allowing their software to be sold as part of that bundle, the money from when you buy that gets distributed in proportion to the retail value of all the software. So lots of money being recycled back into future application development, even for people who don't make use of it on the Raspberry Pi. In July, the light switch was flicked to enable what's been worked on for the last couple of years behind the scenes, which is called zero-page relocation. So this is where we move the operating system workspace that used to be really low down in memory right up into the high part of memory, which allows you to find out all of those naughty little applications that were rummaging around inside the kernel's workspace when they shouldn't have been doing, rather than using SWI calls. So the easiest example of that is there's a amusingly named memory location called the metronome, spelled G-N-O-M-E, metronome, which is essentially the same value that you get back from OS read monitor at a time. Quite a few applications were sneakily just peeking that memory location and keeping an eye on it from that rather than calling the SWI. So they fall over when you move all this OS workspace out of the way, because it's now just a big pile of zeros. It also allows you to trap a very common software bug, which is in C, the value of null is also 0. So if you end up with an uninitialized pointer that is set to null, which is 0, if you then try and dereference that pointer, if you try and look something up relative to that pointer, you end up accidentally peeking operating system workspace and occasionally poking by mistake. So the origin of some strange crashes that no one's ever been able to explain has its origins in accidentally accessing operating system workspace. The easiest example, which I think I have found, was in LangmanFS. It was I don't know how the code got through any kind of review, or perhaps it was never reviewed. On one line it said, I don't know, structure pointer equals null, and there's a couple of other lines in between, and then within less than one screen's full, someone was then using that pointer and writing to it. And I'd always wondered why, when I mounted the PC share, that I then couldn't use floppy disks. That always puzzled me. And it turns out that was it. So it was the LangmanFS was writing over the ADFS floppy disk handler in low OS workspace. So even if nothing else, I'm pleased I can now do both of those things at once. And it's kind of another one of those things that Acorn kept kicking into the long grass. They knew that in 1994, the ARM6 came out. They knew that had 32-bit processor modes, but they thought, well, let's keep on this 26-bit stuff for a few more years and see where it goes. So this is very much kind of trying to look forward to the future and thinking that actually probably there's a reasonable chance that ARM will stop allowing you to put vectors and things at low memory locations in the future. certainly when you have hypervise, so some of the newer ARM processor cores allow you to hypervise operating systems, so you can have several operating systems running at once, all looked after by one overall hypervisor. It's like a supervisor, but corruption on the same name. So I can imagine there's a situation in a few years' time when ARM says, well, actually, no, we're going to move those vectors and you can never have them there again. So this is about as much making sure that we're future-proofing ourselves for that, and also things where you want to be able to run multi-core versions of the operating system. You can't have shared bits of global workspace that everyone's peeking and poking completely unmarshalled. It needs moving out of the way so that we can allow for that in the future. So today it's pain, yes, some applications will crash. Please report those to their respective authors to get them fixed, but there is a long-term view here of not painting ourselves into the same sorts of corners that Acorn did by insisting on still using 26-bit mode when they fully knew that it was being withdrawn. Skip forward to October, so this coincides with the London show for anyone that wasn't there. There's an updated version of the desktop development environment, which is the C compiler, the assembler, and the linker, which people use for writing applications and is also used to build the operating system itself. And with that version, the promise of including the electronic copy of the style guide, so that was added to the DDE, which is quite useful to be able to search within it. It's easier to search than flicking through a paper book. But we do also have, I should say, do have copies of the books available for sale today on the stand. So after this talk, please rush over and buy a physical copy as well. But if you prefer hunting through, if you find searching the electronic copy easier, then that's now on the DDE. And after a little bit of a delay with some amusing tales from the printer who kept cutting that book, it was the desktop tools book, they just could not understand 7.5 inches by 9 inches. There was some very strange conversion that they were doing, and they kept sending back the wrong size books. So although the DDE books were launched this time last year in April, it took until October for the printers to finally get the right length ruler and cut it to the right size. It was probably, fortunately, we didn't get charged for any of them, but I guess there were either 75 or 100 books. Took them so many goes to get it right. Every time you come back to it, yeah, it's the right height this time, and it's the wrong width. It's the right size, but it's the wrong thickness paper, so the spine doesn't line up. It was a true nightmare. The other two books, the C++ and the assembler book, they came out right first time lucky. I really don't know what blind spot they had for that. But anyway, that's a little side story to that. And there's also, yes, having finally got these books, obviously people start ordering them, pesky customers. So these needed to then be shipped, and I think one of the furthest that got shipped was off to, I think it was California. So somebody in California ordered a box set, fair enough. They were shipped out. A few weeks later, the courier tracking number doesn't seem to show that they've been delivered yet. So you contact the customer, have you received them yet? Well, no books here. So you contact the courier, and I think they seem to manage to think California was in Canada, because they then they rang somebody in Canada who had also bought DDE books and said, have you received them? And of course the person at the other end said, yeah, I've received my books, and they closed the case. I said, well, no, you rang the wrong country. I'm reasonably sure California and Canada are different places. I've flown to both of them. So
Somerset as well.
Yeah. So that was so they got written off. Never mind. Occasionally some things get lost in the post. You live with it. So we posted them out a second set. They got there in finally. They arrived 2 or 3 days later, no problem. Then there was back at Rule HQ, ring a doorbell, and oh, why is the postman here? That's very strange. I don't remember ordering anything. A very big box dropped off, and the trail of stickers on it was quite fantastic. There was a sticker where it had said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we've damaged your books," and that was from the Pittsburgh sorting office of the United States Postal Service, because for some reason they had been so it was sent by a courier, and somehow it ended up in the United States Postal Service, and then it got stuck in one of their sorting machines in Pittsburgh, which then damaged the box. And they went, "Oh, sorry, we've damaged your box. We better return it to sender for free." So that was good. And eventually it arrived back several thousand miles later, back in the UK. So there are some very well-travelled books, even if they never actually made it to their intended recipient. So then after October, so yes, it was actually coinciding with the launch of the titanium machine at the London show, but that was not actually then shipped until December. Piccolo Systems been very busy, so that's Ben Avison, for anyone who doesn't know, who's on the rule stand today, rewriting the advanced disk filing system. So the version that you're probably used to using on the RISC PC and the Ionics is a very exciting 26,200 lines of assembler. It's really quite eye-watering code, because originally it started out supporting the Archimedes. So if you look hard enough, you can find the original Archimedes floppy driver buried in the code there. It's been gathering quite a lot of baggage over the years, which makes it really quite difficult to maintain. So the idea was to rewrite it in a much higher level language in C, which also then allows you to make changes to it without having to track through a lot of the code. Because in C you can define a variable type that's, say, the size of the disk address, and then in future, if you decide, well, actually I want to support 64-bit disk addresses, all you need to do is change the variable type and then recompile it. So that's with an eye to allowing to support things larger than the current file core limit of 256 gigabytes. That's the biggest disk that you can currently have. And if you swap to use 4K sectors, you can then get up to 2 terabytes. So that's starting to get more into the reasonable size of drives that you can actually buy in PC world now. And it also supports, and I'm trying to struggle to imagine how big the case would need to be, 15 drives per controller and 256 controllers. So is that 4,000 hard disks, something like that? Right, so in principle, internally ADFS can now support 4,000 hard disks, even though file core is limited to 8 at the moment. But it's all set up and ready to support it when it is required. Now at the moment this hasn't been back-ported, so I mentioned that the RISC PC and the Ionics use the version of ADFS that's written in assembler. In principle it's been arranged in layers so that you can swap the bottom layer, which uses serial ATA, and swap it for parallel ATA, so parter. So if anyone is got nothing to do one Sunday afternoon, then Rule are definitely looking for volunteers to write the parallel ATA backend for that, so the RISC PC and the Ionics can use it too. Early in January, although it was only announced a couple of weeks ago, the Connector Terminal program was open sourced. So this is a reasonably simple application which has some slight vestiges in modems. So there is a dialer. There's an icon for so there's an off-hook and on-hook icon. So if anyone remembers dial-up modems, that is supported in principle. But I think probably for the most people now, it's more useful as a serial terminal, which we didn't previously have in the disk image. And there's again a reasonable trail of having to get hold of all of the different people that are involved. So on the face of it, it's just one simple application, but actually there are a number of authors that contributed to it, the main one being Andreas, who's the guy that wrote the main application. But some of the font handling came from a system that's now defunct called Accept, which fortunately Apple still have the source code to that on their website, and it's freely licensed, so we were able to track down that. There's a guy called Dr. Now it's the other way around, so Satoshi is his first name and Hirano is his surname. Dr. Satoshi Hirano. He wrote some program in, I think it was 1992. Might be slightly misremembering the dates there. Called H-term. So HB for Hirano, his surname. So we had to get hold of him. He was quite difficult to get hold of. He's now, I think, a researcher in America somewhere. He originally lived in Japan. And he didn't reply to any emails, but fortunately his website, if you do the Whois lookup for his website, you can find the registered address. So writing a nice letter to him, dear Dr. Satoshi, would it be possible for you to give permission to use H-term? He wrote a very nice letter saying, yeah, help yourself. So it's very generous of him. And Hugo Fines, who's now, I believe, a multi-millionaire owner of Electric Imp, which is a wireless or Internet of Things widgets company again in America. He originally wrote the block drivers for the Archimedes, so thank you to him. And then the Z modem protocol, which is a way two computers can talk to each other and negotiate. If the link drops or has some noise on it, you don't have to go back to the beginning of the file. So it has a protocol to allow you to say, oh, I didn't get that last block, could you send it again, please? So Chuck wrote that. Now, unfortunately, Chuck died in, I think, September last year, so September 2015, so he was not contactable, but fortunately he had previously open sourced the Z modem code, and it's now in use for various things in Linux, or as a basis for various things in Linux. So after a bit of rummaging around, seeking permissions from people, all of the permissions were granted, and so now if you go to the Rule website, you can download the connector application. Another one rescued from the digital obscurity. In February, so that's the most recent show being the Southwest show, an updated version of RPC-MU came out, so 0.8.14, which is a very easy vector into using RISC OS. If you have a Windows laptop, you can make yourself a RISC OS laptop very easily, and it's certainly very useful for me when I'm travelling on a train and wanting to take some screenshots or something like that, and I think, well, I could either wait until I get home and use a real RISC OS machine, or I could use it on my laptop, so exceptionally useful. There are Mac OS versions for that, Windows as I've mentioned, and you can also compile it for Linux if you need to use it on that. And the reason for the picture of the crash test dummy is that my other use for it, other than on a laptop, is I have several copies of RPC-MU all pointing at different data, so I can have each different version of RISC OS along through time. So if I need to test some software, I can very quickly have several copies of it running and try it out on each version and find out which ones my software explodes on or not. So it's very useful for testing as well, even if not for solid use on my laptop. We have to make a special account of the 29th of February this year, being the leap day when the Raspberry Pi Mark III was released, which is currently on show on the Rule stand with Ben. So Ben has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes optimizing various things for the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So fortunately he was able to have access to one of the prototype versions, which, although it was missing some bits and bobs, I believe some of the networking peripherals and the Wi-Fi were missing, but the main chip was the correct one, so he was able to get most of the early porting work done in secret with the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Now, physically, that looks very much like all the other Raspberry Pis that I've waved in front of people at previous shows. The important thing from RISC OS's point of view is that this is the first architecture 8, so this is an ARM v8. The numbering's got a bit confusing, but it's an ARM v8, which is a Cortex A53, obviously. And the important thing about that is that it has an extra mode that you can switch it into, which allows you to run operating systems in 64-bit mode. And this also has all the hypervisor extensions that I was talking about a few minutes ago when talking about the zero-page relocation. So I guess the point is that for £35 you can now get your hands on all of these futuristic things that we thought would never come. These are, it's a gigabyte of RAM, 1.2 gigahertz, 4-core processor, although 3 of them aren't being used by RISC OS at the moment, and runs on an ARM v8. So the future is now. The future is coming. There's no reason not to have one if they're only 35 quid. The most important thing to mention sneakily down at the bottom, aside from that they added a few bits and bobs, this new version of the processor has removed the swap instruction because that originally came in with the ARM2, but they've now decided to remove that because it doesn't really fit very well into a multi-core processor. Because if everyone's trying to do swap instructions, which are used for atomic action, so if you're wanting to semaphore 2 different bits of software to say, is it okay to carry on? No, it's not. And one of them will sit polling on that semaphore until the other one is completed. That doesn't really work when you've got 4 processor cores. So I'm going to swap that for a very similar function instruction, but it's just different name, LDREX and SDREX. But they've now completely removed the swap instruction. So there are some little incompatibility wrinkles with the Mark III Raspberry Pi in that you can't use swap anymore. Just yesterday, although it's a bit embarrassingly still sitting in my inbox because I was travelling yesterday, the JPEG bounty that's been pottering along for the last year or so has now been completed. That allows us to open all sorts of weird and wonderful JPEGs. This picture, in case anyone's wondering, is trying to show that's roughly how JPEG works, if anyone's got a mathematical mind. Is you break the picture down into increasing frequency content. So the smaller, finer detail pixels on the right are the ones that have most of the information content, and the blank, the basic colour that the picture has is the DC level in the top left-hand corner. And what JPEG does is usually it throws away as much of the fine detail as it can get away with, and that's how you make the file smaller. You throw away information on the basis that your eyes can't see it anyway, and hopefully you get away with an image that doesn't have too many little pixely areas around it. But the original JPEG rendering in RISC OS is done by the Sprite Extend module, which dates from around 1994. It was being worked on when the RISC PC first came out, and that's the version that we still have today. So this is quite a leap forward in time, and it allows you to support the more recent progressive rendered JPEGs and arithmetic compression types that the intermediate versions of the JPEG standard have added. So a lot of pictures on the internet now are certainly done in progressive mode, where you send the picture in strip, a bit like when you used to have a GIF being loaded very slowly over a dial-up modem. It's a similar idea. You don't send the whole picture as one big lump, you send it in pieces that you can put together a rough look-alike of the image first, and then go back and add more detail later. And the other two bits and bobs that are related to JPEG, Change FSI for turning those into sprites has some updates in the wings, and the JPEG compress module, which is what converts sprites back into JPEGs, has also been updated recently. Any day soon, hopefully there's an updated DDE. The testing for that has started, so I'm imagining it's going to be only a few weeks away. It didn't quite make the cut for the show today, which fixes a couple of problems that it itself has in zero-page relocation. So a little bit of shooting yourself in your own foot by enabling this more secure mode of operation for the operating system. That did in fact trip up some of the things that Rule themselves produce. So nice one, guys. And there'll be hopefully some updated Raspberry Pi SD cards. As I said, there are a few wrinkles to do with the Pi 3 still, because of the swap instruction being withdrawn. So that's, again, I would guess, a month or so away, on the basis that there are some third-party applications that are involved with that. And with fingers crossed, I think I probably said the same thing when RC13 was being thought about and RC14 came out. Hopefully release candidate 15 will be the last one ever. It would definitely be nice to get the Raspberry Pi to a point to draw a line underneath that and say that's the version that's good, along with all the other versions of RISC OS for different machines. And then going back to the slide that I started off, in fact, a similar set of emails has gone round to help to ask the NutPi authors whether they have any updates for the newly released Raspberry Pi. Haven't had all of the answers back on that yet. I'm not sure why I didn't move that bullet outwards at the bottom, but if there are any other ideas people have for merchandise, please do come over and tell me or Ben today. It can be anything from sublime to ridiculous. You can get personalised underpants, so it is possible to have RISC OS open underpants if there's enough demand. Or baseball caps, t-shirts, all that sort of thing. We've done mugs previously. So yeah, if you've had any ideas for merchandise that you think might be fun, please do come over and talk to Rule. It's also useful if they're things that fit in the post, so that people abroad can buy them. You don't have to come to a show. So again, underpants fit in the post. I think could be on to a winner. Yes, I briefly talked about on the previous page the Raspberry Pi coming towards a stable release for that. When I was stuck in a car with Steve on the way back from the Southwest show, we took the opportunity to work over the technical issues that are known about. And actually, the technical issues all have known solutions. They are things that, if you do this, that problem goes away. They're not, we have absolutely no idea how to solve this type of thing. So there's a list of maybe half a dozen items. It's a known problem, and it has a known solution now. Unfortunately, finding someone to do those known solutions is always the problem with rules. The shopping list, I can't remember what ticket number they're up to internally, but there are several hundred things that they would love to do, and there's only ever one or two things that they can manage to do. So juggling priorities and trying to pin these things down to a fixed stage is always quite difficult. One way to sidestep some of the complexity is to say, okay, well, we'll just support the Mark 1 and Mark 2, the original two Raspberry Pis, and not worry about these ones that came out in February and came out 2 months ago. Because then that sort of halves the amount of testing that you have to do, or halves the number of things that you have to check. So that makes that a lot simpler. So that's one option. Another option is to start from the feature equivalent set that RISC OS 5.22 had last year, because then you know that you don't have to test anything that was specific to 5.22. You only need to test the things that are Raspberry Pi specific, which again helps simplify or reduce the amount of work required. And sometime before the next stable release, I did bring the paper copy, slightly yellow. This is the RISC OS 3 user guide, which was came out with RISC OS 3.6 in March 1995. So it'd be quite nice 21 years later to have a user guide that actually matches the operating system that you're trying to use. So there's some great chapters in here, and even to do with networking, they completely sidestep even the existence of the internet, because I guess in 1995 most people weren't connected to the internet. So there are big wedges of text here that can either be deleted or that need writing entirely new because technology's moved on. So this is a great example of something where it doesn't matter if you can't write software, you don't have to be a coder. If you can write English or you can proofread English, both of those things allow you to chip in and help out with the new user guide. As at when I set off to come here the other day, 29 of the chapters have been written and proofread, but they're still looking for 33 chapters, so probably more than 33 people in the room. So if you each did one chapter, this would be finished, so it would be fantastic. It's great particularly if you have a background in archaeology. That's very good as well, because sometimes it's not obvious what's changed in the application. It might be that if you run draw, it looks much like the draw that you ever used to see. So there's an element of archaeology involved as well to find out what has actually changed in the last 21 years. And most of that, the CBS history is there. You can go with a bit of archaeology and work out who worked on it, what's been added, what new features were added or removed. So yes, please again come over and see me or Ben later if you think you can help out writing some chapters. So yes, I think this slide is very familiar from last year. For anyone who remembers from last year, please donate money to the bounties. That's always there's always space in the bank account for more money. And if you've got any questions, it's much quicker usually to to send a message to the forum and get a reply from the 2,600-ish other pairs of eyeballs that are reading your question, rather than emailing rule, which basically means it goes to Ben or Steve. They really don't want hundreds and hundreds of questions if they're questions that the general populace can answer. That's a load off their plate, not having to answer them. We've got mentioned from last July the zero-page relocation was turned on, so you can also help out by soft-loading a version of the OS on your computer to see if there are any zero-page relocation problems that you've tripped up on, and report those to the author. And I'd also quickly totted up, speaking of the bounties, that there's about £16,000 has been donated to the bounties so far. and they are delivering tangible benefits. So that either the file core updates that were done a couple of years ago, and the JPEG work, things do happen. And it's not like I would view it as you're putting money into trust with rule. It's not that you're paying for something and you'll never get it. If no developers step forward to do one of these bounties, the money is then put into another bounty. The money is never lost. You're not just throwing banknotes over a fence and hoping that someone will throw you a tennis ball back over occasionally. The money goes into a bank account, it earns interest, and if no one collects it, the money can be spent on other bounties instead. After which, enough of my jabbering. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, on the last thing about the zero-page reporting. Sorry.
Roving microphone.
I'm trying to do zero-page testing. I've got about 10 or 15 applications that cause problems, but I'm not happy writing to the authors about that, because it just gets scattered. And I would like to see Rule have an actual forum title for zero-page errors. I then report them all to that and the author, and then there'd be one place where everyone could see the zero-page errors that come up.
There is a Wiki page with all that.
But it's not. There is a Wiki page.
We dare use the browser on my laptop. We might be able to find it.
But you can't report to the Wiki page as such.
Yes. Is that not the same if you were to report it to a forum?
Then you get some people writing back about it. It would be under one forum. At the moment, you've got things like community bugs, which are special bugs, and you've got other forum items, and I've got the other ones. There are about 6 or 7 forum items. I think zero page is important enough to have its own forum. Please.
Yes, I was the reason I was coming back to the Wiki page was I was wondering if an author, if you don't report it to the author and the author's not looking at the rule forum, they're not going to see a rule Wiki page either.
No, I would report it to the author as well. But I mean, let's take an example. Steve Revel, famous Steve. I reported 2 zero-page bugs to him 6-7 weeks ago. I had no reply. I don't know if he's got the thing, and I don't know if anyone else has had those problems. If I put them onto the forum, they'd be in his face, basically.
Yes.
And I've got some Martin Werner, but I mean, he doesn't read the forum, but I would like to see them all.
Yeah, that was my question, is if you put it on a forum that someone isn't reading, then that's the same as putting it on a Wiki page that no one's reading.
That's right. I wouldn't report it to the author, but say, I've also discussion on the forum. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
And I'm then prepared to put in several weeks testing on zero page.
So, for reference purposes, I'll point you at least a bit that I do know exists, that I can help you with immediately, is there is a page there to report. You've just had a section for the respective application.
Yes, there.
So there you go.
Could use that. We'll have to put it up there so I discussed it as something just in case this.
Yes, it could be a red herring. Yeah,
because a lot of them, because I know there's a new zero-page thing, Bristol, that gives you more information on the bugs.
Yes, the zero-page module does have does dump more information than it previously dumped. But yes, there is a page. The bits I can immediately help you with today is there is a page. But I can't immediately help you with the forum.
Who would I go to get?
I think there's ultimately it boils down to Andrew. I suspect that's probably webmaster at. Is it? Yes, webmaster at riscosopen.org. Andrew is he's in New Zealand, so he won't reply in sensible hours for us. But
I'll take it up with Andrew.
If you email him and say, what about combining or splitting a forum or making it a sticky post, for example? Making a sticky post is trivial. That's one mouse click for him. So maybe that's a lower barrier.
Yes, we'd like to go on the forum and see where all the discussions on the bugs are, because the Wiki page is not really discussed things. It just really.
In the least effort for Andrew approach is probably mark it as a sticky post on the Box forum. That's probably a good solution. Yeah.
Hi, just a quick one about future hardware. as to whether anybody's mentioned supporting the Odroid C2, for example, 2 gigahertz A53,
Not that I know
about
of.
the same size as a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, not that I know of. I think somebody asked either one of the previous shows, is there any ultimate limit to the number of different ports that you can port RISC OS to? And I think the answer is no. Every night, oops, I can click on the right thing. Every night, a computer somewhere in the cloud rebuilds everything for every port that exists. So there's no human involved in doing any of that stuff. So ultimately, there's no machine limit. So there's no limit to the number of machines that you could support, but it's the initial work to do the port, which is where all the time goes. And I think that's the pinch point. You have a limited number of people who have the right skill set to be able to do that. Once they've done that bit, the rest of it is just sausage factory. Every night a ROM comes out.
The BeagleBoard X15 is likely to appear with some similarities that you're entertaining. Will your ROM simply just run on the BeagleBoard X15, or is that more complicated?
Well, we're probably overlapping slightly into one of my other hats. I'm definitely here as rule today. I think the short technical answer is no, because there are clearly differences in both the way that things are pinned out. So a lot of the ports come out on different sets of pins. I imagine that the X15 people probably have a camera input. So, for example, the Ethernet comes out on what was the camera port on the X15. I'm picking an example mostly out of the sky there. I don't have the schematics of the X15, but my instinct would be no, it won't, off the top of my head.
Is a port likely to happen and be relatively straightforward, or just as much work?
If somebody wants to, then yes, they can. It's a very similar question to the previous question. Is there any limit to the number of machines that you can support? And the answer is it's limited only by people willing to do the work.
Any other questions from anybody?
Yes, I can't be that thorough in my presentation. There's only 3 questions.
Just picking up on what was said about the reporting of zero-page books.
Yep.
I've had some success with replies from authors, and they've supplied test programs, and that's worked well. What happens if that author is no longer contactable? A rule, or is somebody looking at compiling a list and getting information back, so that perhaps some workarounds later on can be done to enable the faulty program to continue working when zero-page relocation is done?
Yeah, so I think there are probably I'll go with 4 solutions there. The first, most obvious one is at least make a note of it, either on the sticky post that may appear shortly and or the wiki page. If you don't tell anyone, no one knows. So that's the way to guarantee nothing will happen is to not do anything. Yeah. That's definitely for sure. Then there are probably a sliding scale of what to do for the next stable release. Is you could go for some intermediate scheme where you do relocate the operating system workspace up high, but you leave zero-page still readable. Because a lot of the applications, they're I wouldn't say harmlessly reading it, but they're accidentally reading zero-page, but with no net side effect. So the reason it's giving a false at the moment is because that page has not been allowed to be read from or written to. So there is an intermediate solution where you move all the OS workspace out of the way so that you get your stability from the OS point of view, but allow people to still accidentally read it. That's a solution. Another solution is to add support to the patch application, which is in the utilities directory, so that a lot of the faults lend themselves to being things that were machine generated. So, for example, if a compiler outputs a known sequence of bad code, you can look for that known sequence of bad code and always and fix it, even though you don't have the source code. So, if it's stuff that's machine generated, like from a compiler, then that's another class of solution, is to look for known bad code sequences and replace them. And then a sort of variation on that is what Acorn did when the strong arm came out. There's an application called the App Patcher module. Did I say application? Yes, I did. So a module called the App Patcher module. That's the right way around. what that does is whenever you double click on an application, the OS sends around a message saying, does anyone know this to be a good or bad application? And there were a couple of applications at the time that were not strong-arm compatible, and that module intercepts it and does some magic behind the scenes and then carries on and allows it to run. So that might be another option, is to resurrect what was the actual module for strong-arm and do a similar thing for zero page to allow the applications which the author has vanished to carry on limping a bit longer anyway.
Any more questions? Or is that it?
It's all done, yeah.
Thank you very much.